Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Michael Thatcher, President and CEO of Charity Navigator. Michael, thank you so much for joining me once again.
I'm glad to be here, Brittany.
I know you and I have spoken a few times before, but to remind our viewers, to start off the conversation, what exactly does Charity Navigator do?
So Charity Navigator is a free resource to the American public, really helping you find good nonprofits to support. So we have a website which has all registered charities in the United States. We have ratings on about 240,000 of them, and we provide sort of access to the ratings. We do the ratings for free to the donors. It's free for the charities. We also put together curated lists in times of crisis, or if you're looking for the best charity working on some specific issue, we'll make that available to you. And then the last thing we do, which I think is important, is we allow you to actually make the transactions directly through our website. We don't charge anything for that. And there are different ways that you can actually make your gifts. You can make anonymous gifts. You can have a whole basket full of charities that you give to. So basically, a one-stop shop for your charitable giving to ensure that your giving is impactful.
And you and I have spoken before about the intersection of politics and giving, and we're going to visit there once again today because last week, President Trump passed his second first 100-day milestone. And broadly, what impact, if at all, does a new president's first few months typically have on charitable donations?
So what ends up happening with a new presidency is that folks respond by supporting the causes they care about, particularly if they're causes that they feel might be underserved by government. So if you look at the first Trump presidency, we saw a large increase in giving going to civil liberties, to the environment. And so we were looking at things that people were worried about there. There's a similar but slightly different shift right now because there's been a more aggressive sort of attack on the nonprofit sector, particularly with regard to U.S. aid and international aid abroad. And so what we're seeing again is we're seeing a spike in traffic going to some international aid, particularly. So the largest increases we're seeing were aid for Ukraine. And just to give you an idea of what I mean by increases, we did a comparison of the same first 100, the same 100 days in 2024 as compared to the first 100 days of the Trump presidency in 2025. And an organization, Hope for Ukraine, giving to that organization has gone up by 2,404% in the first 100 days. There are other Ukraine-focused charities that's up around 1,000%. We're also seeing increases in giving to immigration law and also the environment, and then a little bit less to, let's say, but still high. In other words, close to 100% increases in reproductive health and also gender diversity.
Wow, those numbers you first ticked off regarding Ukraine, those are high, 100 or 1,000%, 2,000%. Is it unprecedented to see that type of spike in giving?
That's incredible. And normally, we can see when there's giving can be very cyclical or very much driven by the media cycles, but a 2,000% increase, that's quite unusual. Now realize there was a lot going on around Ukraine in the beginning, the first 100 days, right?
Mm-hmm. And I know that there's been widespread concern over Doge and Elon Musk, that they've been recklessly cutting jobs and really taking a sledgehammer to government agencies, like you said, particularly USAID. So there's an indication people are giving more towards those types of profits. On the flip side, are any different organizations, different sectors seeing less donations now?
So one area that we've seen a little bit less giving to is the humanitarian aid and also food aid to a region like Gaza. Now, again, remember we're doing a comparative analysis to same time last year. I think Gaza and Israel were much more in the news cycle last year. They're still in the news cycle, but not quite in the same way as Ukraine was. But there's there's less giving going on there at this point in time.
And you're seeing that huge spike in Ukraine giving. Right now, the United States is involved in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine to find some sort of permanent resolution to this war, a permanent ceasefire. So let's say that does happen. Do you expect to see this trend continue where there's more giving dependent on where the president's priorities are?
To a certain extent, but I think people tend to give with their hearts, right? And that can be affected by what's happening in the world, but then there's still the causes that folks really care about. I mean, the reality of Ukraine, with or without a ceasefire, there's going to be a need for aid and rebuilding of that country for quite some time. I think that's one of the challenges with disasters, whether they're the results of war or the results of a fire like Los Angeles. There's going to be a need for aid for several years in rebuilding and reconstituting the lives of the people that have been affected.
And Charity Navigator used an interesting term in President Trump's first term, and that was called rage giving. Can you explain, A, what that trend is, and B, if you're seeing that now in Trump 2.0?
So I'll go backwards. Yes, we're definitely seeing a continuation of rage giving. And I think what the way rage giving works is if you see the government or an entity sort of removing funding from something you care about, people respond by giving to it. So I think what ends up happening is, for example, areas that are increasing right now are areas that we know the president is looking at, askance at this point. So whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, the environment, certain parts of the world, these are all areas that have come under attack, and there is going to be a need for additional funding, and people are stepping up to that.
And so do you predict that we're going to see rage giving continue in the next, let's say, 3.5 years of Trump's term?
There's a level of unpredictability in all that's been happening over the last 3 months. And so I'd say yes. I think there's some fatigue that's coming with it. And so it's hard to follow at this point. I do think that, one of the core things that I've noticed in all of this is at its base level, giving is American. It's something that all Americans do, regardless of their politics. We give to all sides of the political spectrum. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think we will continue to see strong support for the causes people care about, irrespective of what those causes are.
That's an interesting point, that giving's American. You can be either Democrat or Republican, and independent, apolitical, and give with your heart. And we know now, though, that there are nations around the world trying to come to the table with the United States, trying to negotiate with the White House to make a deal regarding trade. The tariff rates that we're seeing from President Trump are the highest since the Great Depression. And economists I've talked to have all said tariffs equal higher prices and less disposable income. Does that concern you when people are having less disposable income, that they're going to be giving less soon?
I think, the individual giving tends to follow the economic cycle. And so if there is less money available, people will have less disposable income to actually provide to the sector. I think, if you look back to the recession in 2008, it was roughly a 9% decline in giving year over year. What's interesting about where we find ourselves right now is that giving actually grew in 2024. And so there were predictions that we were going to continue to grow. It's unclear what happens with the economy. And I agree with you, the increase in prices and just the cost of everything, it also affects the charities and their ability to execute on their programs. So we're all impacted by it.
And can you dive a little deeper in there behind the reasoning why you think we saw giving grow in 2024?
I think the giving grew for a couple of reasons. One, 2023 there was a decline actually in giving in 2023, and in 2024 things were a little bit better, right? And so I think the market was a bit more stable going into the year. People ended the year on a high. The other area where there's been growth, and I think this is an area which maybe to the extent people put money in their donor advised funds, they're going to be in a better position this year to continue supporting the causes they care about. Because once the money goes into a donor advised fund, it can only go to a nonprofit at that point. It has to be distributed to a charity. And so that growth in donor advised funds, I think, has actually helped stimulate more giving and could also help some of the giving over the years, over the year that comes at this point.
I know that you said that the past 3 months are unpredictable. I mostly cover politics, so I do agree with you. I mean, there's a ton of uncertainty around world events, the economy, and everything in between over the past couple of months. And Michael, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you said in our last conversation, election results matter and giving shifts going into the election. And I know we don't have midterms until another year and a half here, but do you have any predictions or are there any trends we're going to see now until leading up to midterms?
So I think behind some of the politics that are playing out right now is there's a strain in terms of the Jobs Act is expiring this year, and the government has to come up with a way to actually meet the need that the expiration of that Jobs Act is going to have. So I think we're going to continue to see, at least in the next 9 months, through the end of this year, sort of going after areas where there can be some revenue generated. I don't know what that's going to mean for the charitable sector. It seems to be an area of focus when you look at some of the attacks on some of the major institutions that are functioning as nonprofits right now. I think that'll continue. I'm hoping that we get some stability there and the focus goes away from the sector and we allow the organizations to keep functioning and not be the point of focus, so that because the work that's needed, and I think I'll go back to this idea of the nonprofit sector in the United States, it's so integral to our lives. It's the after school programs for our kids. It's healthcare. It's the work coming up with remedies for deadly diseases. That's all part of how we live as a country. It is also allowing people to manifest in different ways and with different opinions. You probably have as many pro-choice as pro-life charities in this country. You can agree or disagree with that, but that independence and the independent sector, I think that's what I worry about, that we lose the independence and it become a single focus. And so I'm not going to make a prediction on that, but I do see that as a point of contention that we're going to see continued conflict for a certain while.
Well, I'm sure as these conversations continue, as there are more developments coming out of Trump 2.0, I hope we can have more of these conversations. I appreciate the data today from Charity Navigator. You are welcome back anytime. Michael Thatcher, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me again.